this royal mile, and they've got their phones in the air. They're waiting for the moment when the Queen's coffin comes out of the St. Giles's Cathedral, because they know we are now in the final hours of going through the Scottish countryside. We saw the rolling hills, the beautiful lakes. Someone said to me, our Queen is giving a tour of Scotland to the world, the Scotland that she loved, and we're seeing the love being reciprocated here as thousands have again gathered along this section.
To the airport, the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, will be accompanying her mother on that journey. The coffin making its way to London. We're going to continue to have live coverage for you. Let's just listen to the scene for a moment. As that coffin was departing of the cathedral, the guard of honor by the Royal Company of Archers. The hearse is going to make its way directly to Edinburgh Airport, where a guard of honor of the Royal Regiment of Scotland will receive the coffin, also with a royal salute. And there, a bearer party, as it's called, from the Royal Air Force will carry that coffin into the aircraft and remain with it during the journey to London. And as mentioned, Princess Anne will be accompanying her mother. As you're looking on the right-hand side of your screen there, that's King Charles III and Camilla Queen Consort. They're leaving there after a full day in Belfast on their way to London as well. St. Giles Cathedral is where the Queen had been lying in rest, and the public was able to join a vigil there. They were able for 24 hours to make their way to the cathedral to pay their final respects, say their final goodbye to the Queen who so loved Scotland. There were several plans in place for many decades now as to what would happen when the Queen died. One of those plans, Operation London Bridge, would be if the Queen had died in London. And the other one, Operation Unicorn, if the Queen had died in Scotland. You're looking at the wreath there, and this wreath, of course, has deep meaning to the Queen. Several plants that were picked from Balmoral estate form that beautiful wreath on top of the oak coffin, draped in the royal standard of Scotland. Among those flowers, the white spray roses, white freesia, white chrysanthemums, and dried white heather from the Balmoral estate. An estate we know was near and dear to the Queen, a place where many royal commentators have said was really where the Queen felt most at home, a place where the royal family for generations had been able to relax, to hunt, to roam the vast estate, and really become part of the small community there. As our reporters spoke to people living in this area, people who've been lining up for that vigil at St. Giles Cathedral, we heard of the close relationship that this area had with the Queen, because she in essence was the fabric of the community. She stopped into local markets, local butchers, store owners knew her by name. There's Princess Anne waiting to accompany her mother to the airport. And so really a poignant moment for the royal family and for Scottish citizens who are mourning the Queen, because this is her final departure from Scotland. Applause from the crowds gathered outside of St. Giles Cathedral as they bid farewell to their monarch as she makes her way to Edinburgh Airport, accompanied by Princess Anne, her only daughter. The Queen selected Princess Anne to accompany the funeral cortege on the first leg of the journey back to London. And you may recall the Princess Royal also escorted the coffin from Balmoral Castle here to St. Giles Cathedral. A special relationship the Queen had with the Princess Royal. Once they make their way to the Edinburgh Airport, it will then make its way, the coffin, to London, to RAF Norfolk. The Princess playing quite a prominent role, as we've seen, in the plans that were so carefully arranged by the Queen, overseen by the Queen, decades ago, in fact, and tweaked at the moment of her death. But it was the Queen very much having a hand in everything you're seeing play out, that longer journey than necessary from Balmoral to this scene here in Edinburgh, St. Giles Cathedral. The Queen essentially taking everyone on a tour, one last tour of her beloved Scotland through the countryside. We saw people lining the road. We saw local farmers with their combines lining in respect as the hearse made its way from Balmoral Castle. St. Giles Cathedral, of course, was the scene of many poignant moments in the last 24 hours. Last night, the Queen's children held a special vigil around the coffin. We've seen images from that playing out since that earlier this morning, where King Charles III looking stoic, just gazing down as the family stood vigil around their mother's coffin for 10 minutes inside that cathedral. And then, as mentioned, the public, who had lined up for many hours, also had a chance to pay their respects, making their way past Edinburgh Castle there on their way to the airport. Airport. You have been there for days now, ever since the coffin made its way to St. Giles Cathedral. Perhaps you could walk us through your sense of the crowd as you're standing there. We heard applause as the casket was leaving. What's your sense of the mood?
Jen, we heard the sounds of bagpipes, we heard the sounds of the drums, and as the Queen's hearse made its way away from St. Giles Cathedral, we heard the sounds of gentle and respectful applause. It was absolutely silent while the ceremonial procedure was going on when the Queen's coffin was being brought out into the car. I think for about 20 or 25 minutes, you could hear a pin drop, and there are thousands of people here crammed into the small area outside St. Giles Cathedral. But again, as the Queen's hearse made its way away from the cathedral and towards Edinburgh Airport, which will be its final destination here in Scotland, people started clapping and cheering respectfully. Abby, and perhaps you can reflect a little bit on the significance of this trip and the events that took place. I mentioned the private vigil by the family, for example, that happened last night inside that cathedral. You know, all of this is very much unprecedented. She is the first British monarch to die in Scotland in 5 centuries. A lot of these ceremonies that we've seen in the last 2 days would not have been witnessed had she not died in Scotland. You know, royal biographers believe that she had hoped that her last days, her final days, would be in Scotland. And of course, we know that she was very much part of the planning of her own funeral, that she would have known exactly what would have unfolded here, that she knew that this was very much steeped in Scottish tradition, and that she wanted the world to see this. And the Scots that we've spoken to here in Edinburgh, they come from other parts of the country as well, have said that they are so grateful that they were given this opportunity to bid farewell. Again, it wouldn't have been possible had she died in England. So that is some of the stories that we're hearing, they're talking about the fact that she's absolutely the Queen of Scots. You know, they don't refer to her as Queen Elizabeth II here. We've been constantly reminded that there is only one Queen Elizabeth that they recognize. She's the only one that has reigned over their country. And so a lot of love being shared, a lot of stories and memories of times where various people have met her or seen her on television. But certainly today, a lot more somber than it was yesterday, as they recognize that Queen Elizabeth is leaving Scotland for the very last time.
And Abby, because of course it was not known when the events of last Thursday would take place, the royal family had to make their way to Balmoral Castle in a hurry, didn't they? We don't know exactly what they were told, but we know that now King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla were close by to the castle at Balmoral, and they were able to be at the Queen's side.
Certainly very unusual to hear Buckingham Palace make a statement as they did on Thursday. And when that notice came through that the Queen was unwell, the doctors were concerned. It really alerted not only the United Kingdom, but the rest of the world that this was a very serious situation. Prince Charles, he was Prince Charles in that moment, made his way quickly to Balmoral. The rest of the family followed, and as we know, she passed away with them by her side. And this very much a family moment. A lot of people here have been telling us they don't know, of course, what it's like to be royal, but they know what it's like to lose a member of their family, a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, and that it's absolutely tragic and painful to watch them grieve so publicly. This is their private grief being shared with not just the United Kingdom, but the rest of the world. And you mentioned the vigil, certainly when the 4 children stood around her coffin, and that's certainly going to be a moment that stands out for people here in Scotland.
Abby, thank you for joining us on this as the Queen makes her way, her Queen's casket, to Edinburgh. Bonnie, we're talking about Princess Anne. There you see her there, the Queen's only daughter, and she will be accompanying her mother's body on this RAF aircraft as it makes its way to London. And perhaps we could speak a little bit about the special relationship and indeed the special honor, however difficult, that the Princess has been given from the moment the Queen's coffin departed Balmoral.
Well, it is indeed a special honor that's been given to her. Being the only daughter, it's not overly surprising, and I'm sure that's where the Princess Royal wants to be, traveling with her mother to get her home from Balmoral with all the stops. This part of the journey should be a little easier for her now because they will be on an aircraft versus 6 hours or 7 almost in a car as they drove down. Like a lot of us that are lucky to have had great relationships with her mother, so did the Princess Royale, and you could see it whenever they were together. They had a great kind of rhythm between the two of them. They had lots of humor, and the Princess Royale has been a key member of the royal family, works diligently, does lots of events, manages all kinds of things going on for the royal family, so she's been a huge contributing factor to her mother and to her father, and they would have been able to share and talk about royal life and just the duties that they all have to some extent deal with on a daily basis.
As you say, the kind of honor that the princess would no doubt be happy to take on as she accompanies her mother home, as we said, to London, to Buckingham Palace, and she's accompanied on this flight by the Reverend David Ferguson. He's the Dean of the Chapel Royal in Scotland, and they will be arriving in Royal Air Force Northolt. The timing perhaps a little bit earlier, Bonnie, because things took place about a half hour earlier than at least we had been expecting, according to the official schedule.
I think things are just, sometimes they move along quicker than you expect, no matter how well you plan out something. And when King Charles, when they were, giving their condolences in Ireland, that was actually a lot shorter I think, than they were expecting, which was fine when they made their tributes to the Queen.
This is the Queen's final goodbye to Scotland and Balmoral, a place she loved so dearly. And so before this aircraft leaves for London, perhaps we could talk a little bit about that. And we know that in the background there is much discussion about an expected independence vote, Scottish independence in the future. That kind of discussion has, for the most part, seemed to have been quieted for this moment. Bonnie, perhaps as we prepare to leave this scene in Scotland, your reflections on what we have seen.
Well, I would first of all say yes, was it historic and was it wonderful? Absolutely. I think what we saw today, we witnessed politicians and politics at its very best, where they all took the time to basically hail the Queen for her role and her contribution to peace. And that is something that we can't overlook, because that is what she was doing in her quiet, diplomatic way. And she will be remembered by Ireland for her role in historic reconciliation. So that's quite a badge for the Queen to wear when it comes to peace and to reconciliation. Now, will the battles come back again in another week or so? Of course they will. Politicians, for the most part, are very good people, and they fight for what they believe they need their country to be. Whether we like all of their thoughts and processes on this, we all have different views, and that's why we belong to political parties. So they will come back together, and King Charles has been doing what they've been dubbing, the King's Tour, which is my understanding from my sources at the palace, is that this was actually laid out in the Queen's plan in the operation to bring her home. So I think what we witnessed today is thanks to Her Majesty because in essence what she has done over the past 20 years or so with the issues in Ireland is she has turned the crown to some extent into a vehicle to be used for reconciliation.
As the Queen's coffin prepares to depart Scotland, Bonnie, you've been discussing about the events that took place earlier today. The King and Queen Consort spending a busy day in Northern Ireland, and you've touched there on the history that was heavy in the moment, but not overly discussed today. But the significance of the Queen, as you say, in reconciliation, and no doubt the challenge that the new King now has.
We saw a peaceful day. We saw recognition of somebody who was fighting for peace under difficult circumstances for the Crown as well, as for Ireland. So she started a process which she knew she would never finish, but you have to start, and you have to start with narrative and conversations and trying to come together to resolve issues so that people can live in a safe and healthy society. And King Charles will carry forth this same pledge, and that is part of the reason for this tour that we've seen him do. It is absolutely appropriate that he should have done this tour before he left to go back to England.
The aircraft carrying the Queen's coffin will be departing Edinburgh Airport in a matter of moments, as you see there Princess Anne and other dignitaries making their way to the aircraft. The Guard of Honor of the Royal Air Force giving a royal salute as that hearse, as the coffin was loaded onto the aircraft. Bonnie, if we can listen in, I will be quiet, but for the moment, let's keep talking about the next chapter in this and what happens once this aircraft lands in London.
Well, I think some of the members of the royal family are actually getting a bit tired. It's been hard to manage their emotions, and deal with the work, especially for King Charles and also for the Princess Royale, because she's, we've seen her everywhere basically since day one. And when they land I don't know who's meeting them or greeting them on the ground. When they land in London, I don't know if the King's going to be there or how that process is going.
That's not our, well, from what we have seen, it's not our understanding that he will be there, but of course Princess Anne will be with her mother's coffin. And then once it makes its way, once the hearse departs for Buckingham Palace, so of course a guard of honor will again be greeting there at the airport. And then at Buckingham Palace, another guard of honor of the King's Guard will receive the coffin as it arrives at the grand entrance. And there it'll be carried by a bearer party, as it's called, of the Queen's Company 1st Battalion, the Grenadier Guards, to the Bow Room. Perhaps we could chat a little bit about the significance of where the Queen will be lying in state for several days.
You mean, are you talking about Westminster Abbey or at the palace?
Yes, let's talk about both. Let's walk us through the journey.
Well, Buckingham Palace is actually supposed to be the official, residence and home, and so the Queen, would have spent an enormous amount of time in that palace, and most of her children had apartments there as they were all growing up, and some still do, except for King Charles, who lives at Clarence House, which was the Queen Mother's home. And my understanding is that he'd actually like to stay at Clarence House. But the palace has, for the world, has always represented the home of the monarch. And the original home of the monarch was actually St. James Palace. So, they go through feelings and emotions for these palaces, and then some they determine that they really like and they want to spend a lot of time in. So Buckingham Palace is the symbolic palace for the world, where the monarch should be, and that's where we always see her standard or her flag up or down, whether she's there or not. So that would be the significance that is where she should be. It has the best space of property around it as well. As you know, the circle with Queen Victoria, for people to come in, crowds can really gather there. And most of the Jubilee celebrations or great celebrations that the royal family has had in the last 25 years have all taken place at Buckingham Palace. So it is the symbolism of that building that is where she will spend some time.
We know that throngs of crowds are already in London waiting for this. So we were speaking with our Dominic Valitis a little earlier, who was interviewing someone who has staked out their place to try to be able to be a part of history there, prepared with everything from food to proper clothing to wait for many hours. What are you hearing, Bonnie, in terms of preparations in London for ending? Bonnie, let's just listen to this moment for a minute. Elizabeth II, about to make her final departure from her beloved Scotland. Her daughter, Princess Anne, accompanying her on this final journey to London. It has been for many an emotional few days. In Edinburgh and at St. Giles Cathedral, Abby Kuadasa, I believe, Abby, you're back with us, and perhaps we can reflect now on the momentous occasions that you have witnessed there, including when the coffin was leaving that cathedral one final time. What was that like? Bonnie Brownlee, our royal commentator, you're still standing with us as we watch this scene live. Your thoughts on this particular moment and its significance?
Well, when they played God Save the Queen, that's what it was for me. And in this very moment, I know it is now God Save the King, but that was for the Queen and for her send-off. So it's very, must be emotional for the people standing on the ground right now listening to this and watching it. And also even for the Princess Royale sitting on the aircraft with her mother, just, you know, realizing that this is the last time that her mother will leave this country. And perhaps they're all now ready to get back, you know, to London and proceed with the coming days. I do know that some of the members of the royal family are, it's not that they're tired, it's just it's been highly emotional and difficult to, you know, grieve in public and try to find moments, because when something like this happens, you like to be with your siblings, you like to be with your family, and so they've all been separated. But as of today and tonight, they'll be able to spend more time together.
To mark this moment as the Queen departs slowly. Stop, the Queen's other home in London.